Good morning. Welcome to the next in the series of webinars on the SASB standards. Today we're going to be discussing healthcare. I'm Michael Kinslick, head of the standard setting organization. I'm here with Kane, our healthcare analyst. Today we'll be reviewing SASB's approach to standard setting. Then Eric will go into some of the details on the healthcare sector, talk a bit about the provisional standards and expected changes to those. We'll then look ahead at next steps in the standards development process and leave some time for Q&A at the end. So to highlight, SASB's standards development process focuses on materiality at its core. For that, we use the Supreme Court definition of materiality in a U.S. investor context, which is that material information is that which the exclusion of which would have would alter the view to a reasonable investor of the total mix of information available to them. This is the underpinnings of securities law in the United States and really is the core of SASB standard setting approach. We start at the bottom of this pyramid with looking deeply at evidence. We take an industry-specific approach to our standard setting, and we want to ensure that those standards are informed by the market, both from issuers and investors. We focus again on the left side here for this materiality determination on, most critically, the potential to affect value creation or financial position of an organization. We want to ensure that the topics we use in each industry are relevant across the entire industry, not specific to a single organization there, that those topics are of interest to investors, that they are actionable by companies. These are things that companies can actually take steps to manage in their operations, and that these are reflective of consensus across issuers and investors. In looking beyond the topics at the specific metrics that we develop, we want to ensure that they fairly represent the topic or issue that we're looking at, that they're decision useful to investors, that they are comparable across companies, that they fully describe the issue we're trying to determine, that they can be verified, that they can be traced and reasonably assured that the information is accurate, and also that they're aligned across the set of industries that we look at. So they are looking at, and also with external developers of metrics and standards. We bring those together in a standardized form, including technical protocols on implementation and descriptions for inclusion in the MD&A section of the financial reports, with the goal of arriving at issues and standards and metrics that are material, decision useful to investors, and cost effective for issuers to prepare. As I mentioned, these are designed for inclusion in the mandatory public filings in the United States, the 10K, 20F, and 40F for international and Canadian filers, and really in the MD&A section of those documents with robust discussion and analysis around the standards and metrics themselves to allow for deeper understanding of the context in which that information is being delivered. Looking a little bit at how we arrived at our standards and metrics, we started with a broad spectrum view of the market of topics that might potentially be of interest. We honed that set of topics through our materiality determination, looking at evidence of financial impact through exploration of that evidence. We then looked to characterize the nature of that impact. So is performance on a given topic or metric likely to affect revenue generation, cost embedded in a business, potential asset or liability valuation, or the risk or cost of capital to the business? We put those potential topics and metrics out for public review through our industry working group and public comment period processes. And the topics that met with broad acceptance, we found roughly 75% accordance between both groups of investors and issuers that these topics were material and relevant to future financial valuation. Then again, looking at those issues, we find that companies are actually broadly agreeing and reporting on these things in their 10Ks already except we also find that most of that reporting tends to be boilerplate disclosure. So our goal is to move that boilerplate disclosure, and Eric will talk a little bit further about that when he gets into the healthcare sector itself, but moving that boilerplate disclosure into standards and metrics that investors can use for direct comparison across organizations. And then finally, we're engaged in sort of deep analytics around the specifics of the financial impact and the potential for adjustment to valuation of an organization. And so these are issues that affect different companies, different industries differently. So some examples of these might be the risk of counterfeit drugs entering a pipeline for a pharmaceutical company. That could potentially affect the reputation of that company. It could affect demand for that product if consumers and prescribers can't be assured that the pipeline is safe. So there's a direct impact on potential revenue for that organization. Other producers need to ensure that their production is efficient and is managing the waste streams that come off of it effectively. So these are potential costs to an operation for a pharmaceutical producer or a medical device producer. And then we're seeing a lot of social pressure on healthcare providers to be able to deliver healthcare affordably and with access to a broad array of consumers. And there's potential fines and regulatory impact for those organizations that fail to do so. With that, I'm going to give it over to Eric to go a little deeper into the specifics of the healthcare sector. I'd also like to remind you to get in any questions you have. We'll be taking those at the end, but you can enter them at any time.
Thanks, Michael. The healthcare sector, as SASB defines it, is broken into 6 industries: biotechnology, healthcare delivery, healthcare distributors, managed care, medical equipment and supplies, and pharmaceuticals. And although the standards that we developed are industry specific, across the sector we noticed 2 primary themes, and those are quality of care and patient outcomes, and then issues around access and affordability. The chart on this slide indicates all the disclosure topics that we identified across the 6 healthcare industries. And again, you'll see that issues relating to safety, access, affordability, patient outcomes dominate, and those are typically in the social capital realm. Michael alluded to earlier the idea of looking at the current state of disclosure and the fact that most of the topics that we've identified across the different healthcare industries are already disclosed in some manner or another. This graph demonstrates 4 different categories of disclosure in the Form 10K or 20F. No disclosure suggests that companies are not currently talking about the issue. Boilerplate suggests that they are mentioning the issue, but in a non-company specific or non-industry specific way. The third category is company-tailored narrative, which suggests that the company is using more company-specific or industry-specific language to discuss an issue. And then the fourth category, of course, is metrics, and that's ultimately what we're hoping to move towards. So you'll see that this slide demonstrates that most of the issues across the different industries are currently agreed by the companies to be material and are therefore discussed in some way or another in the Form 10K. For example, in biotechnology, only 20% aren't disclosing across the different issues. Of course, what we also see is that a majority of the disclosure at this point is boilerplate. So we're hoping to move the needle forward towards more decision-useful disclosure. This slide comes from the same analysis, but it's specific to pharmaceuticals. So we looked at the top 10 companies and how they were reporting on the disclosure topics that we identified for that issue. And again, it demonstrates the fact that most of the issues are already discussed in one way or another in the Form 10K. But of course, again, most of the issues are being discussed in a boilerplate fashion, which ultimately is not useful for investors. Next, we're going to discuss some of the other results from the provisional standards and give some examples of the themes that we identified earlier. As I mentioned, the idea of access and affordability is one of those themes. And of course, that issue and the associated metrics play out slightly differently across different industries. So for example, in healthcare delivery, access is really about the strategies that companies are taking to ensure that patients of different insurance status are able to access services, whereas in pharmaceuticals, it's more around the idea of access to medicines and descriptions of initiatives to promote access to healthcare products in priority countries, as defined by the Access to Medicines Index. And then for managed care, it has to do with medical loss ratio, rebates accrued, and rebates paid for non-compliance, and then also the percentage of proposed rate increases that were determined to be not unreasonable. This slide gives a sense of the results of our standard setting process for medical equipment and supplies. As Michael mentioned, one of the key components of that process is the IWG, or the Industry Working Group, and this gives the percentage of those participants who agreed that the issue was likely to be material for each of the issues, and then it also identifies the evidence of financial impact and where that's likely to occur. And so we look specifically at revenue cost, asset liability, and cost of capital. And then we also tried to determine if there was a high impact across those areas, medium or low as well. One of the key things about SASB standards is the idea that they continue to evolve and reflect issues that are really being, discussed in the news and are evolving. One of those, for example, is counterfeit drugs, which is an issue in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. The Pharmaceutical Industry Association suggests that 10% of medicines worldwide and up to 50% of medicines in developing nations are counterfeit. So this is an issue that affects companies in those two industries in a variety of ways. It damages reputation, it directly can reduce sales, and of course it can bring upon new regulation, and we're starting to see that here in the United States, where regulators are starting to require RFID tagging and other technologies to try to better ensure the safety of and traceability of the supply chain. So SASB's metrics related to that issue specifically are about a description of methods and technologies used to maintain traceability, also used to alert customers to any potential counterfeit products that may have infiltrated the market, and then also the number and description of actions that companies have taken to try and reduce the number of counterfeit drugs that are available on the market. And sticking with the same issue of counterfeit drugs, this slide demonstrates 3 different examples of the current state of disclosure from 2015 SEC filings, and these are from real companies, and you can see the difference. On the left-hand side, we have an example of a company that would be using what we consider to be boilerplate disclosure, and really, in this example, you wouldn't even necessarily be able to tell that the company is selling, pharmaceuticals. In the second example, they move slightly forward and are talking specifically about FDA actions and what they're doing to address this problem. And then the third example is an example of a company that's actually using metrics and talking about the number of products that have serialization and other technologies across their product lines. And of course, SASB's mission is to get to the point where we have comparable data across different companies within industry on specific issues. So this is an interesting slide that comes from government analysis on the idea of data privacy and security in both managed care and healthcare delivery. This is a growing problem. SASB's identified this issue to be material for both industries, both in terms of potential fines through HIPAA regulations, but also in terms of reputational risk. So this slide kind of articulates the growth of the problem over time and really points to the need for better disclosure so investors can make useful decisions. SASB is currently in the middle of a consultation process where we have identified specific disclosure topics and metrics for change. We have created what we call a hypothesis for change document, and we're currently seeking input from both issuers and investors on those changes, and that document and the proposed changes will ultimately go for public comment in Q2 of 2017. So the next couple slides just provide some examples of the proposed changes. First, in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, we identified the issue of affordability and fair pricing to be material, but we're proposing to revise the metrics. We're hoping that because this issue has garnered a lot of attention in recent years, and the impact that it can have on share price has become increasingly clear, we're hoping to develop metrics that perhaps better capture performance on this issue. Another example is in managed care. In the plan performance topic, we're proposing to remove the enrollee retention by plan type metric. And the rationale behind this proposal is the idea that increasingly consumers are choosing healthcare based solely on price. So we don't necessarily think that enrollee retention is really a strong indicator of performance. And I'm going to turn it back over to Michael to discuss some of the next steps in SASB's process.
Thanks, Eric. We're looking here at the SASB's plan for the process under which we'll develop our standards now and going forward. And the goal here is really to ensure good governance and oversight of the standards development process to ensure that we're meeting our goals of transparency, accountability, and market, by the market and for the market is how we describe this. So there in the middle is our standard setting organization. That would be our analysts like Eric and myself and a couple of other researchers focused on the standards development process, focused on looking at evidence, doing research, engaging with the market, with issuers, with investors. That we will ultimately report to an independent standards council that will be appointed by the SASB board, and that group will have ultimate authority over the standards themselves and the process itself. However, they will also have accountability to the Standards Oversight Committee, which will be a committee of the SASB board, and have responsibility for investigating any claims of where we did not follow due process in the standards development process or otherwise failed to meet our obligations under the process that we are putting forth. As Eric mentioned, we are in the process of deep consultation now, so our Our standards development process right now is taking the provisional standards that were completed over the past several years, incorporating the proposed changes that we are currently visiting with the market on. So having deep consultative meetings with issuers, with investors, to ensure that both the standards and the proposed changes make everything fit for purpose, decision useful, and cost effective to implement. We intend to continue that deep consultation process through the end of Q1 next year, after which we will submit the proposed changes to the market for public comment and move to codification of the standards in September of 2017 so that issuers can start using those in their 10Ks in the 2017 reporting cycle. So our goal is to have the standards ready for use in Q3 of next year. And right now we're engaged in a deep consultation process to get feedback from the market. So if there are those of you on hearing this webinar who want to have that kind of meeting, now would be the time to contact Eric and make your voice heard. We also recently announced our investor advisory group made up of many leading asset managers and asset owners who want to see standardization of reporting around sustainability issues and support SASB's mission in that vein. We believe that creating a market standard requires broad participation, and we're really pleased that so many leading organizations have chosen to support us in that way. We also have several advisory partners available to help issuers in meeting the challenges of looking at the standards and metrics and thinking about how they would incorporate them into their reporting, and we'd be happy to make those introductions as well. And finally, within SASB, we have a system of support for issuers, for investors, for others to help them engage with the standards. So not just anyone can go and download the standards themselves from our website, but also technical bulletins. We have our SASB Navigator that allows folks to dig deeper into the research and evidence behind the standards. We have our materiality map that helps folks look at which issues and topics are relevant in which industry. We have research briefs, and we have, as well as implementation guides and engagement guides, we also have our Financials of Sustainability Accounting credential. We just passed our first set of credential holders this year, and we have a good set of new applicants for the next round of that, and we'd encourage you to look into that as well. With that, I'd encourage you again to enter your questions. We're going to get to those in just one moment. Great. So first question, how will the standards change if the new administration and the Congress were to repeal the Affordable Care Act?
It's a great question, and it's something that we'll continue to monitor. Before I mention, go further on that answer, I just want to point out the fact that the slide here has the wrong email address. So the correct email address, if anyone does want to reach out, is actually health_care@sasb.org. So I apologize for that. With respect to Michael's question, I think, for the industry at large, there are a number of questions that people have in terms of what will happen to the Affordable Care Act, whether it will be repealed entirely, if it is, what it will be replaced with, and that could have implications, of course, across the entire sector, specifically for healthcare delivery and managed care. So we'll continue to monitor those changes. We don't really think that anything needs to change at this point. A variety of different industry groups, the managed care industry group, the American Hospital Association, et cetera, are starting to make their demands, their wishes clear to the incoming administration, and it does seem like a lot of the aspects of the Affordable Care Act, such as the focus on quality and reducing costs, are things that they want to see kept, and our metrics are tied to some of those aspects. So again, we'll continue to kind of monitor the situation, and the SASB standards are intended to kind of be a living document. So if changes need to be made at some point going forward, we'll do so.
Great. Here's one. I can see how efficient production is an environmental issue, but how does climate change affect those industries in healthcare that it's listed there?
Sure. So currently in the provisional standard, we have a climate change related issue for two of the industries. That's healthcare delivery and managed care. For healthcare delivery, the issue really relates to the impacts both on human health, but also physical infrastructure. We had a number of examples in recent years where storms that could be attributed in part to climate change have caused significant damage to healthcare institutions. Hurricane Sandy in New York is a great example, and the damage that it caused to the NYU hospital facilities in that area. And then the idea of the impact that it can have on human health, of course, presents a challenge to healthcare delivery in terms of a potential increase in the number of patients that they'll see, and then that also presents an issue for managed care. We think that changes in disease profiles could ultimately change health insurance models, and that health insurance companies are going to increasingly have to account for those changes in health. And as part of the hypothesis for change, we're also proposing to include an issue around the impact of climate change on human health to biotechnology and pharmaceuticals. Over the years, there have been a number of examples of how disease profiles have changed as a result of climate change, or at least partly due to climate change. I think Zika is something that's perhaps top of mind with respect to that issue. And although vaccines haven't traditionally been major value drivers for pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, we have seen some examples such as dengue fever, where there is an expected, considerable market for vaccines, and we think if companies were to seek out those opportunities, there could be potential value there. Of course, as Michael mentioned, this issue, among the others that we're including in the hypothesis for change, are really kind of open for consultation. So we're going to take feedback from issuers and also from investors. So it remains to be determined whether that issue will actually be added to the standard.
Yeah. On that note, we have a question here. Are you proposing any additional topics for inclusion in the healthcare sector? It sounds like you just mentioned one for biotech around disease migration. Are there any others?
The other issue that we're proposing for addition is around drug pricing. As I mentioned, that was an issue that we identified for both pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. But a lot of the recent attention that this issue has gotten has shed light on the fact that managed care, specifically the pharmacy benefit managers within managed care, and also healthcare distributors play a role in drug pricing. So we're proposing to add a disclosure topic to those two industries around that issue.
Great. Question on when will the standards be finalized and become expected to be reported in the 10Ks? I'll take that. So as I mentioned earlier, we're expecting to finalize the standards in September of next year, and we don't necessarily say finalized because, as Eric mentioned, these are living documents, and we will always be looking to the market and to the evolving landscape for potential changes going forward. We expect to make those changes on a rolling 3-year basis, but of course reserve the opportunity to take urgent issues that demand more timely attention up as needed. And our position is a little bit twofold on this. One would be that we believe these are issues that are material now and are things that companies should be reporting on in their 10Ks, regardless of when the standards get adopted or not. But also that it's always up to individual companies to determine what's material to their operations and what they should be reporting. Great, we've got one more here. which is, what are the most material issues for the biotechnology industry?
This is a question that we get a lot, and we actually don't rank issues in terms of materiality. So what SASB seeks to do is to determine whether a disclosure topic will meet the materiality threshold or be likely to be material for a company within an industry, and then we propose metrics around that issue. So we don't really rank the issues in terms of materiality.
Great, and I will also add on that there is no specific threshold for materiality under the Supreme Court definition and interpretation. It is really whether a specific fact or issue would alter the total mix of information an investor would use to make a determination about that company or security. We have another one. How do we measure environmental efficiency? So what kind of metrics do we use for that subject?
Without knowing specifically what industry we're referring to, I think the energy and water and waste issues that we've identified, typically for energy, we're looking at issues around the amount of energy used, the percentage that's renewable. For waste, we're looking at the amount of waste disposed, the amount of hazardous waste disposed, and then the percentage of that which is recycled. And for water use, we're looking at the amount of water used and the amount that comes from water-stressed areas. And that's generally how we approach it, but of course it would be industry-specific.
Great. That is the end of our questions, and with that we're going to sign off. We thank you for your participation in the webinar, and if you have any further questions, you can certainly contact us directly. Thanks very much.